the launch, well, with Pulsechain launch, there's a V4 coming out. And before there was like a version 2 or 2B. Is there going to be like a V4, V4B, that sort of thing, or a 3B, or is it just going to be 3 and then 4? And how long do you guys predict each will take?
I guess with programming, there's something could come up to where they need to make a fix or adjustment, and which is a good thing. I mean, because look how short Testnet V3 was, so that was kind of wild too.
Why was it wild? Like, I think V3 was only to do the 2.0. Like, I don't think V3 was there to show you the buy and burn. I
Yeah,
don't think.
I have a friend who is a pulse chain sacrificer, and he had some bad news from his doctor, and he's looking for treatments and stuff. So for him, I'm just kind of like just trying to get a feeler, a little bit worried about how long it'll take for it to launch.
Is another version because has to be relaunched, but it's not another version the same way that like V2B and 2 and 3 were like completely new testnets with like really big changes. 4 is just the only reason they have to do that is because they changed some of the parameters around the validator rewards, and to do that you have to basically fork those in. So V4 is really just a continuation of V3. That's the reason this was short. They've got most of these other changes that they went in there and updated already, but that change you can't just update it with the software the way they've done the other like validator pairs for peering and things like that. So 4 is really just a continuation of 3. And so I wouldn't say that this really changes anything. Like it's just an uncomfortable thing because this was supposed to be kind of like the last test net. But 4 is really just a continuation of 3. They just have to relaunch it to actually update that parameter. So really, in my opinion, nothing has changed. We're like in the exact same spot we were. They just have to relaunch.
So Walrus, when you say fork, right? Do you think that it will snapshot everything new as
they could use a different snapshot? I would imagine that they'll just fire up the same way they did V3. Like I don't think there's a reason to do like another snapshot event or any of those things. I would imagine they just basically go and make the validator adjustments and just basically restart at V3 from where they did. I mean, again, they could obviously do a different one if they wanted to, but I don't see why they would. I think you just adjust the chain ID one and refire it back up with the changes
and keep the same RPC.
They'll probably have to change it. So the Shanghai update, that update is for ETH, and so that's when I don't think it does anything else now. There was more changes encompassed, but the main one that everyone cares about is for validators to be able to unlock their ETH. So as of right now, if you're a validator on ETH, you can call your rewards, but you can't unstake the initial ETH. So that upgrade, again, people can speculate on those guys waiting. The devs and RH have said that they're not waiting on that, and that's something that can always be added later on. And I would even imagine that we would want to give Pulsechain some length of time before they upgraded that. So even if it was released before Pulsechain, I would imagine they would want to launch without it for some length of time.
It's about the ratio trading that you're talking about, like the 48-hour window, before it's live, I'm assuming, and who can participate and how the swaps will actually work and what you think a good ratio is between PLS. I mean, I know that's subjective, PLSX to PLS, but do you know if anyone's going to bring in any kind of liquidity or make the ratio good, or is it just up to the users?
So the ratio trade, like everything is live. The only thing that's not live during the ratio trading is the bridge. And the reason that it's considered ratio trading then is just because there's not dollar values associated with these. So everything about the way everything swaps is exactly the same as it is now. The dollar values that we usually use, that's just a user interface tool. It has nothing to do with how the actual code works. So the ratio trading will work exactly the same way it does now. You just won't see, most of us just kind of think of these things in dollars rather than looking at what is actually being swapped. So you'll just have to look at what those things are being swapped. On the liquidity, there will be initial liquidity set between Pulse and Pulsex by the fixer bot that runs. And you can look at some of that stuff if you want to like actually dig through it on how that liquidity was deployed. If you want to look through the address, it takes a little bit of time, but that ratio can be moved very quickly. So the starting ratio, like everyone's kind of like interested because they want a number to look at, but no exaggeration. It could be orders of magnitude away from that ratio by the time the average user comes and looks, because that pair could just see a ton of volatility. And especially if it's thin, that ratio will move quite a bit. So yes, there'll be some liquidity. Yes, people are more than welcome to provide liquidity in there quickly. Some people probably will. There'll be a big risk of impermanent loss, but there'll probably also be insane APYs because of the volume between those pairs early on, especially as other pair transactions route through them. So you'll see some people that are willing to kind of make the degen play there and see if they get some really insane APYs, especially if they can add their liquidity at a good ratio. So there'll be some pretty interesting stuff that goes on there. As far as like what ratio makes sense to me, it's not really something I'm interested in trying to make that guess early on. For the most part, I just assume that all these things will do really well and that most actions I'll do early are just a chance to screw up principal. So I'm pretty reserved on those things. So when I like what ratios make sense for me to trade aren't because that number is rational. It's because that number is actually so irrational now that I'm worth it to make a trade, right? So for example, if you say, all right, Pulse and Pulsex, they're really like one Pulse is worth 2.5 Pulsex. Like, okay, maybe just if we use that number, right? Okay, well, I'm not going to trade on a number that makes sense because I don't really trade. And I think that both will be valuable. So if you say, all right, well, the ratio is 3.5 to 1, still probably not enough because I could easily just be wrong, right? This stuff's hard. But if I think the ratio that kind of makes sense is say like 1 to 2.5, and you're going to give me 50 Pulsex for one Pulse, okay, well, at that point, that makes sense for me to make a swap because that seems like an irrational price, but it doesn't mean that ratio makes sense, right? So it's almost like two questions there. Like what is a sensible ratio for those things versus like what ratio am I actually willing to swap at? So I think the sensible answer is probably somewhere between 1 to 1 and 5 to 1 on Pulsex. I think that's likely kind of the range we'll see early on. And it's not until those ratios get outside of that I would actually be interested in really making any swaps. Hopefully that gives you some clarity.
Yeah, that does. Thanks. It's also which one you think is going to perform better, isn't it? As to what the ratio in your head would be.
Exactly.
I have a friend, my friend who's the Pulse Chain Sacrificer. He has a friend as well who is also Pulse Chain Sacrificer, and they were offering me a swap. I think they were trying to get me to swap 3 to 1 or something for some of my Pulsex because I'm interested in getting some more Pulse. But at the same time, I don't want to get a bad deal.
So to me, just quickly, I'll get this last one out. To me, people thinking about price is difficult for layers of abstraction. I actually think the easier way to try to make these, the ratio idea in people's head. So like you can do the axis of life thing where you just like crush the math and have TA and have a lot of rationale. And I think that there's a ton of value in that. But I think for most people, the way you would actually want to look at this is more of like a sports bet. So I don't really care about the particular pricing or which one does this or that. The way I see this is, okay, which one do I think will do better? Okay, well, I'm not that smart, so I'm just going to use the historical answer. And the historical answer is the native token, right? So if you just say, hey, you can have 100 of each, which one would I want? I'm probably going to say Pulse. But when you look at how well Pulsex is designed, the fact that it's coming from the same founder, like there's all these specific reasons about why Pulsex is really competitive. So the way I see it is, if you tell me the ratio is 2.5 to 1, I don't really think about like the pricing between those. I just think, okay, so if that's the ratio, then I can bet that Pulse has to outperform Pulsex by 2.5x for this to make sense. So I just see this as what are the chances that adds up. And so I look at this much more as like sports betting odds than I do of like an actual price ratio. But it just makes it easier. That just makes it easier in my head, right? So like trying to figure out the actual ratio of those things sounds kind of complicated. But if you say, hey, if the ratio is 5 to 1, it's you can make this swap. And if Pulse doesn't outperform Pulsex by 5 to 1, then that trade doesn't make sense. So I think thinking of just, hey, which is more likely to be the winner overall is easier than trying to do price calculations, at least for me.
I really appreciate the money line to point spread analogy. The money line bet is point spread. But that's pretty good, Walrus. I never thought of it that way.
You guys could bet that if the coin is at a 3 to 1, Pulsex will be super like I don't believe that Pulsex will only be that, because it's either one of them will be used for more liquidity, and I do think that it's on Pulsex most liquid AMM, and I think they designed Pulsex to be the most liquid asset on chain, because then it would free all kinds of use case for Pulse to be more utilized for development and staking for Validity on chain. And then you would be able to utilize more Pulse and have more native Pulse staking, and you wouldn't have to always have these liquidity providers provide Pulse in this case. So like, to me, I feel like we're really underplaying Pulsex, and I think that they made it that ratio coincidingly to fuck with everyone's mind, to make everyone think that like, we don't give a shit about it, but like they really do. They actually value it more when it comes to liquidity. That's just my opinion on it, because it's been too much 3 to 1 this whole time. Like, I just think that when you're going to be able to use Pulsex, holy fuck, it's going to be like, people are going to definitely use it. They're not going to not use it like they are on Testnet, like, and everyone's just using Pulse and everyone's just trying to get Pulse, you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like it's going to be much more needed.
So Famous, have you ever used the Kronos network?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So I was looking at them like they'd be sort of like Binance Smart Chain. And when their most liquid DEX came out, I'm not even going to mention the name of it because the token is absolute garbage trash. I
Which
look
one
at
was it,
that.
VVS or ChronoSwap?
They promoted it as the most liquid exchange on there, which was the VVS, and
Is
that's
it?
been performing like garbage.
Yeah,
Now,
garbage, pure garbage.
when complete. Now, does it function? Yeah.
No, it
Does it do
doesn't.
what it says? No.
I don't think the chain. I don't think the chain allows it to function, and I'll explain to you why. When it got like a little boost back in the day, the fucking chain was like it was costing you like 1 CRO per
Yeah.
transaction.
Yeah, I was just worried that that would be the fate. That's the worst case scenario for Pulsex, and the best case scenario would be like
Oh
maybe
no!
Pancake Swap,
Oh no!
right?
Oh no! Oh no!
No.
So the fact that the fact that we have a certain designed supply, in my opinion, to be super huge, and the fact that we're copying the gas fees of something that isn't as huge, it's just like a cheat code. Now the cheat code to that is, well, now you got to think like, okay, well, now you got to create a need for liquidity so people could use this coin that has an insane amount of liquidity. And well, what do we know? Okay, well, we know that ETH is definitely going to gain on liquidity, but it's also going to gain a shitload of people trying to stake it when it gets withdrawals. When the withdrawals come, thinking about this lately, it could go to 50% supply. Like when people realize they can make a percentage off an asset that's going to be appreciating like a dramatically like a shit ton, I'm pretty sure a lot of people will put their ETH or they're going to hoard their ETH much more.
Is Pulse Chain success or Pulse X's success then reliant upon the sacrificed assets
No,
or the fiat that was gained from the sacrifice set?
no, it could dump. Okay, so the beauty about dumping an asset into oblivion is that the one side of the liquidity will get a shit ton of it, so like that the next people who come in get a sick amount, in my opinion, right, compared to the supply percentage. Now this
What do you mean?
coin is also okay, well, when you look at Zen, right,
Mm-hmm.
right, that shit goes down to the right.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Inflation. Okay, cool, but what happens if the pool is maintained like it currently is at a very low liquidity? Well, the one
Mm-hmm.
side right of Zen gets bompered. So it's like it's a shit ton. The ratio just moved. So that's what's happening. The ratio is moving. But the thing is that you need to have that much in there in order for people to not either drain the pool or get too much of a good deal. So you got to maintain pool A. But the more you drop the price, the more you're gonna have of that token on A if you just maintain B, right? So we got to look at it like, well, if people just maintain Pulse as a liquidity, then what happens to Pulse F? Because what's going to be more profitable for people? Is it going to be more profitable for the ecosystem as a Pulse chain whale to validate, or is it to provide liquidity? You
But
got
you
to
need
think
both
fast.
to provide.
Yeah, but what's better for you as a moneymaker? No, you
If you
technically don't
believe
need.
both, if you
You
believe
don't
both
need that
will
much.
appreciate,
You don't need that
then
much
you
liquidity of it. You don't need that much liquidity of it. You just need to have something that goes ahead. Like, to be honest with you, you just need a project that goes ahead and does transactions. You don't need to have liquidity for the token. The token will be worth it because people need that token to do transactions. And if the guy, if the people just say, oh no, well, only this much is purchasable because this asset is really rare, there you go. Now, the problem with ETH is that too much of its supply was being used for liquidity and not enough of it was being used in order to sustain the development and the transactional purposes. That's why proof of work was total garbage.
So let's say it was more profitable to validate, and you held your PLSX. Now this goes. I want to go back to that topic you guys were talking about when I hopped in. It was about the DAO, and how if the single sided staking was native or was part of PulseX DApp or past PulseX's code. Now, if we have to use PulseX to make these votes, couldn't we be able to make PulseX a pool, its separate pool, and gain PLS or gain another token instead of
Did you see what that address did at the beginning?
which one?
The address was 6.32 times 10 to the fucking 16 Pulse. Number one wallet on Pulse Chain Testnet V3.
No, I didn't follow it. What would happen?
So it did pairs for every single token it took on PulseX. It made every single pair. So we could have traded our PulseX for every single coin we wanted.
So that address is the AMM deployer address. But to Mel's point, so the DAO doesn't get to decide what pools exist. It gets to vote on what pools are approved. So those pools have to be sponsored. So they're like, for it to say, hey, we want PLS as a pool, someone has to put it up, right? Now, I, for example, could say, hey, here's a DAO proposal. I've got however much pulse. So you could put up PLS if you wanted to, but those pools have to be sponsored. So like what would be more likely to see on those pools is like, hey, I'm a founder. I'm going to put up the Walrus coin. So I put up a DAO proposal and I tell everybody why the Walrus coin's super awesome. And I'm willing to put up, 100 million Walrus coins in a pool. Here's how they're going to distribute and, some of the parameters on the pool. And then the DAO votes, yes, we do want Walrus tokens. Go ahead and run that pool. Or no, we hate Walrus and his bald head. He can't run a pool. So the DAO votes on what those are, but the pools still have to have a sponsor for the reward.
Yeah, but those sponsors would have to be an inflationary token because it would have to keep minting. It would have to come from somewhere. After a while, it would run out.
Nope. So after a while, it does run out, and after a certain amount of time, it runs out too. So IFO pools are specifically designed to be ownable. They're designed to be timeable, and they're designed to be reached at a limit. And also, they're designed to make you not put that much. So it says you can only put that much in one wallet. So those are the characteristics of IFO pools. So no, the coin doesn't have to be inflationary. They can allocate a percentage of their supply for a certain amount of time to a certain amount of Pulsex that they want to obtain, and they can redistribute that accordingly.
Pulsex or Pulse?
No, the rewards of that IFO pool.
Oh, okay.
If it's working like the way IFO pools work on PancakeSwap or any other.
Yep.
If it works.
Yeah, it'll be very similar to those or to SpookySwap. And the advantage on this that's cool is, so the initial, like everyone's initial reaction is like, well, I want Pulse and Pulsex. The pro to having these pools sponsored by other tokens is that, let's say that I'm a big Pulsex player. Okay. And you guys all Pulsex. Well, you guys don't want me to take profits in Pulsex because now I'm selling down your ticker symbol. So, but if I'm a big Pulsex player and I'm wanting to take some profit and the Walrus tokens get sponsored, well, I put my PLSX in, I take all this yield in Walrus token, I sell the Walrus token, and that's how I take my profits. But now I don't sell down your ticker symbol. And then for everyone who does want Pulsex and Pulse, they take the Walrus token, swap it into Pulse or Pulsex, and then add it to their bag. So the cool thing about having these third-party pools is that anyone that wants to take profits doesn't have to take profits on our ticker symbol. You do it on everybody else's ticker symbol. And those that want to just add to their bag and want Pulse and Pulsex, well, they just sell the whatever tokens they get and add to their bag.
So yet again, Pulsex would be the token that would be staking in these single-sided staking pools.
Correct. The Pulsex token is obviously exposed to the Pulsex buy and burn. It votes in the DAO, and then it's the token used in the single-sided staking.
The most liquid DEX.
What I was explaining is when you do single-sided staking in Pulsex, the payout is not in Pulse or Pulsex. And even though that's what a lot of people would like to be paid out in, it's a good thing that it's not. So because all these third-party tokens are what sponsor those pools, that means that, again, if I'm a big holder of PLSX, when I get paid in whatever token, I just sell that token down, not PLSX or Pulse.
Oh.
And if I want to take profit, right.
I see.
And
It's
then
a
if I
party
do want to
token.
add to the bag, I sell those.
It's that party token.
Correct. Party token was the placeholder for those, and party literally stood for third party.
Sure. You would just stake it single-sidedly, and you're not selling your Pulse. You're getting that other coin. Cool. Thank you.
All right. First of all, I remember Richard Hart being a fan of Uniswap V2 because you have to put a lot more on stake, having both sides of the pair, correct? So do you? Yeah. So do you see? Even though the V3 core is now public, I mean, I don't foresee Richard introducing that early on, especially. So do you anticipate thinner liquidity pools and thinner liquidity because of the V2 code being implemented at start? Because not everyone's going to risk that, right? What's your take on that? Or do you see Richard Hart going with the V3 code as well sooner rather than later?
That's a good question, bro, because you're gonna come out with something I want to talk about not on here, but first somewhere on a stream. But fuck it, you deserve it. So if Richard does not include the withdrawals and Richard does not include the V3, because if the V3 is out, people are probably going to do something with it now. Meaning that when he copies it, there will be V3 available in Pulsechain or other dApps that utilize V3. So you can take out V3 from Pulsechain, but you cannot use V3 in Pulsex, right? It cannot be included and you need to add it. Same thing for the withdrawal. If he does that, Cha-ching, like light bulb, everyone should have the light bulb. That means that the fucking block height is already done. Because if the block height is after all those things, he cannot not include it. You understand?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's exactly what got me thinking.
Now it could have been all an excuse. Could have been a perfect excuse because he knew it's a perfect excuse to say, fuck, I might as well integrate it. I wanted to integrate it as well, but let's practice updating it, right? You got to practice the update while people are doing something, right? That's part of it too. Now, if they fork it or not, that's up to them, but why not practice forking it? Don't you want to know if it's forkable ahead of the game?
Yeah, I was thinking that same thing, bro. I was like, he's also testing the forking
Because he's
mechanism.
already, Mello, he said it already. Like, well, if Pulse Chain gets fucked up, we'll just fork Pulse Chain. And like, if Pulse Chain is very successful, then the accessibility of being able to copy that success is going to be very easy. Why copy ETH when you could just fork Pulse Chain? So then we might see these chains come about, Pulse Chain killers. You know what I mean? And they're going to come and say, oh, we're Pulse Chain killers, and we're doing a system state of Pulse Chain. I
Dude,
could
I
see
was
that
telling
happen
some
too.
some
So
some
why wouldn't
rec
they be the
dude
first ones
earlier.
to try it out?
I was telling some rec dude earlier, like he was just telling like post chain this, post chain that, and like doesn't make sense. He keeps saying that the talking about the contract and the codes is not gonna do it well, and why is there testnet after testnet, and it makes no sense. Like if you can do better, the post chain is open source. You can go and fork it yourself. And I feel like he's doing this so it can be better and better. So next time there won't be no zero, downtime where someone's
I
complaining.
think it's just part of his plan because
We just need to chill.
I think it's
Stay
part of his
mellow.
plan because why wouldn't you create something to allow people to like if Richie was that much of an RH maxi, right? If he was that much of a hex maxi, why would he really be okay with people building on top of hex? Why would he always have preached, "Oh, I want you to build on hex." People could build on hex, and why would he have created something so simple but complex to the point where, yeah, it's the simplest form of it with him, and you could make it more complex by building on top of it. So Pulse Chain would be the perfect thing to even more to build on top of, because it's like, well, if Ethereum has L2s, why can't Pulse Chain have an L2?
A big part of the original idea was just to make sure that you didn't drop something of value in everybody's wallets. It's much, much easier this way for a lot of jurisdictions. So some of that was just about value proposition of being dropped in wallets that already has USDC value. And the other was essentially allowing people to your point, to shuffle their bag per se in ways that they wanted to while it was still zero value. So there's definitely pros and cons to both sides for sure.
And with the LP, so on launch, let's say someone is not in the Richard Heart ecosystem. They're not in Hex. They're not in Pulse Chain, and they're not in Pulsex. But they're in an ERC20 token. They're in the top, let's just say 10,000 wallets. Well, they at least have some liquidity. They can pair against Pulse. Then it is their obligation to try to find a pair to trade in between. And all the people that already got in, they have the liquidity in Pulse to be able to afford what it is to keep the ecosystem thriving, at least from that perspective. And that's kind of how I see that for encouraging people with PRC20s to get in. Because it's not just about the hexagons at this point. It's about convincing people to use the platform, even if your coin does not operate on Pulse Chain. For whatever reason, the devs don't want to do anything over there.
Yeah, I think a lot of that freemium narrative is unlike, hey, come to XYZ chain, and you go there, it's like you don't know where anything is. You don't even know what like similar type projects might be built and whatever it is that interests you. But if you start with all these ticker symbols that you understand, then you have this you have a pretty low barrier there to initially come in and make a few transactions, right? So if you come on and like you like some type of NFT stuff, it's like, all right, well, that NFT's there. What's that community doing, right? Like there's something to engage with right away. Whereas if I'm like, hey, come to Walrus Chain, you go to the Walrus Chain and you're like, all right, like what's here, like what's in it? Like you have to do so much to even kind of like make a first move per se, versus having ticker symbols you're familiar with and some of this this really unique way to freemium onboard. So yeah, I think it'll be really positive.
Yeah, it is a beautiful design. I think, one switch of a button on the RPC setting and that's all you need. You can't get any more simple than that, really, or more basic, which is important because how many people find that RPC switch and know about that switch? That's like pretty much the key to open up to the blockchain. So how we get eyes on that switch in MetaMask is very important. Because if we could have the best blockchain on the planet, but don't know how to open that door or switch that button from Ethereum network to the Pulse chain network, that they're going nowhere.